One's a cardinal.
So one's the cardinal and the other says first gen card. So there's like a recognition of first generation staff and faculty, because there's a emphasis on kind of calling out a welcoming environment for first generation students. So about a third ish of
Oh,
U of L
interesting.
students are first generation.
Yeah. Are you a first generation college graduate? Yeah, me
Yeah,
too. Me
yeah.
too. Yeah.
I learned that from like Delane Priest, I think, or maybe Mary maybe Mary Beth Ehas, in some collaborative work I was doing with them, this whole idea of even just you got a room full of people, how many of you are first generation students? And you see what the hands are. And I've done that here some too. And did you know, Chuck, I would see at UCF, I would see like a little flurry of hands. And it was kind of like, pay attention, look at that, right?
Yeah.
And you do with that information whatever you want to. Either you go, oh, there's more here than I thought, or there's less here than I thought, or we have folks who that was their background and now they're bringing themselves into this environment. But I think when I've done it here, there's fewer hands that go up.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. I mean, it's not exactly a scientific study, um, but I learned that from, it was either Mary Beth or Delane, and I would do that occasionally at UCF in different settings myself. And then I've done that here. Just interesting to see what you get.
That is interesting, and I don't know what your motivation for going to college was. Um, um, I wish mine were noble, but mine were basically I didn't want to go to work in the mill,
Yeah.
so I went to community college. I mean, that was the motivation, you know. I had no real aspirations for education.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, that's a long topic unto itself,
Right.
um, but I think for me, I was one of those people that just always thought it was the thing to do, despite the fact you can call that cultural conditioning or
Right.
whatever, but neither parent had gone to, let alone graduated from. Um, but I always saw it as the thing, right? I mean, I never read any Horatio Alger, but I read references to Horatio Alger my
Right.
whole life, right? And like people would talk about, the getting ahead thing, and it just seemed like that's the way to get ahead is college. So I was completely naive. I had no idea how it was going to work. I only applied to one place. They let me in.
Yeah.
I just didn't know what I did. And I was reflecting when I came here and I told this story that, I think pathways are important. And for me, music was a pathway, right? Like somebody put a trumpet in my hand and I was successful with it. And that opened up a door. Like I had, you know, like band director, music teacher people, and they had graduated from college. And
Yeah.
I saw, like, okay, maybe they'll let me in to study this and then they'll let me out and I could see the idea of a job. And that's not exactly the way the path went, but it was a pathway that I could see.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that whole notion of, you know, um, who makes a career decision? Nobody. It just sort of happens
Yeah.
in life. And you and I think somewhere along the line realized that when are you happiest? Happiest. I'm happiest when I'm learning new stuff.
Mm.
I love the new things. I know you do too, in terms of
Mhm.
exploring and going down a path and finding that it's a cul-de-sac and getting back out and seeing what we can find. We're talking about quality here, and there is some quality component to what we've experienced in this educational life. There really is, and it's a great life. It is a great life, learning and teaching, hey. And you sent me the podcast, which I found was tremendously interesting. And also the fact that Gallup has tried to develop a multidimensional model of the meaningful life. Interesting, both interesting concepts. I don't know if either one's a jump off, but
Well, you want to officially start this recording?
oh, we're not recording yet?
Oh, we're recording,
Oh yeah.
but like it's good to have a start. So if you're watching this, in case you were wondering what you're watching, I'm Kelvin Thompson,
I'm Chuck Chubin. Good morning,
and
everyone.
the two of us have been talking about quality, uh, only pausing intermittently for at least 20 years now in relationship to online and digital education and beyond. And we thought we would record these conversations
Yeah.
and try to help find some there. How's
Right.
that?
Yeah. Well, the quality issue has motivated both Calvin and Chuck for many, many years. We've edged up on it, we've walked around it, and it is really a very engaging, interesting, and difficult concept. Calvin and I both believe in quality. We believe, we are true believers. However, however, we are struggling. You drinking coffee?
I have a little bit of coffee left. A little bit. Ooh, they even spelled my name right. That's nice. Look at that.
Oh,
That's
you got it
you
right.
don't always get that on the
Yeah.
coffee cup. That's good. Yes. Right before like we officially like started like this bit of the conversation, we were talking, and you had commented about this podcast episode that I texted you this past
Yes,
week,
right.
and so you were starting to say, "Hey, you listened to that," and I don't know if you found any relevance uh, to the topic at hand or not, but I was curious what you would think.
Oh, I don't know if I did. It was very interesting. It's sort of the uh the thing of that we need to move beyond the historical work model, and retrain our brains, and the fact that creativity and quality thinking is very ephemeral. It is located in the brain for a very brief time. And one of the concepts that was played out in this podcast was this notion of nervous exhaustion. Uh,
Mm.
that was where we live in this environment of kind of exhausted all the time. And I'm always reminded of a comment by Brene Brown. Why is exhaustion a status symbol in
Mm.
this society? And it's
Yeah.
so interesting when we look around and talk to our colleagues. I'm exhausted. I am working, nonstop. And I guess the question of the podcast, are you really working? You know,
Mm.
are you really working? Because we all know that we have peak times of efficiency, and they're very fleeting. At least they are for me. I don't know about you, Kelvin, and our listeners are, it has a brief life, and then the stuff gets really old really fast. Mhm.
Yeah, I all that. I found the conversation interesting, and I guess the words quality and quantity were thrown around a few times.
They were indeed.
And just to situate it a little bit, so this was on the Good Life project, and the person being interviewed was a neuroscience researcher,
Right.
Dr. Mithu Storoni. And like here's just two quotes that just to kind of put it in context. One, the interviewee said, "We are pivoting to needing to work to produce quality rather than quantity because machines are going to be doing, if not already, the quantity aspect of work." So that was part of it. And she speaks about the way our human brains relate to more quantitative kind of thinking versus more qualitative kind of thinking. And Chuck, you've been speaking recently, either on the recording or not. You and I have been talking about these conversations. You said something along the lines a while back of like, I find that I'm really thinking as we're having these conversations,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to I don't know what, but but
Right.
really, it kind of gets the wheels turning or something. And I wondered about that. Like, what does Dr. Storoni, what would she say about really thinking in relation to that quantitative versus qualitative aspect of the brain.
It's an interesting conception. One of the things she did say is we are moving to valuing knowledge work in this podcast, and I find that very interesting. And I find this almost repeatedly making quality and quantity a binary decision.
Mm.
You're qualitative or you're quantitative. And I've always liked Paul Guy's book, in terms of discourse analysis, where he's talking about the fact that this dichotomy is false. That imposing the quality quantity binary perception of this is not relevant to the way human beings function. I always found that interesting because he said there's huge overlap in these kinds of things, and this is a forced model upon something that doesn't necessarily fit. And I'm back to Brene Brown in terms of this kind of thing, and there was a little of the podcast of how to, do this kind of thing, and I've always like Brene Brown's quote is like, how to doesn't work. If it did, we wouldn't be the most overweight, in debt, medicated, addicted adult cohort in the history of the country. How many how to books have we seen on this, and the whole notion of let's just examine the characteristics of successful people, with the implication that if you do this and understand these characteristics, that somehow you will be successful as well. I don't think that tracks. I just have trouble with that tracking in terms of reading all of these kinds of books. And Brene Brown said something I think very interesting to me, that there's a $60 billion a year business in this country that depends on people getting up in the morning and saying, I'm old, fat, tired, have wrinkles, bags under my eyes, and yellow teeth. And she says if people stopped buying beauty products and diet pills for a week, there would be a major shift in the economy. Where we seem to be in this, and with the podcast, we always need to be somewhere else from where we are now. And that is an interesting perspective to me, because it's great ideas, and and I agree with all of that, but I'm not sure what exactly knowledge work is in this contemporary society. Do you have any ideas on that, Kelvin?
I mean, I've resonated for years around the knowledge work thing. Maybe I'm a sucker. I don't know. Um, on the podcast, they talk about knowledge work dating back to the 1950s,
Right.
where you're as large groups of people, at least in the United States of America, um, moved away from more manual labor kinds of tasks and jobs to working, maybe presumably in offices. So there's like working with words, working with ideas. But here's in the early 2000s, here's how I started thinking about it. Do you find yourself working in cafes or third spaces with a computer? It's probably knowledge work.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. The space, the space of knowledge work.
And what you can do. Also, I mean, it's very privileged, right? Also, if you look at the COVID-19 global pandemic, and could you do your work remotely, even if it took a little bit of effort? Could you do it? Probably knowledge work.
Interesting. Interesting. I wonder what knowledge work is in the world of AI. Mark.
Yes.
Mark Smith, who's wrote a section on our latest article, Mark is vice president of TGS in Oslo, Norway, and in charge of leadership with a very large energy exploration company. And his contention is with AI is that he has basically will eliminate the first rung of onboarding in organizations. It will do all of the kinds of things that you did as a first rung worker, but the side effect of that is you lose all the cultural acclimatation of the organization, and you really don't have a chance to onboard yourself within an organization because those tasks are taken away from you. An interesting concept, an interesting concept as we, go down this road of quality. Um, you know, what is a quality job? What is a quality education? What is a quality life? And
One thing, just to throw in another quote from Dr. Storoni in
yeah,
that Good Life Project podcast episode that's related to what you were saying. She said, quote, "The biggest role of the brain in the workplace," she's speaking about like
yeah,
kind of contemporary now, "the biggest role of the brain in the workplace is generating the thought process, generating the planning, generating the ideas," unquote, "that are associated with quality rather than quantity aspects, which she says the latter are, quote, being taken over by AI," unquote. So this reminds me of, I heard Chris Dede, who's still somehow associated in his retirement with Harvard, doing a talk a year or two ago around AI. And he talked about this synergistic relationship between humans and AI, and he used the metaphor of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Captain Picard and Commander Data, right? You've got like Captain Picard, you've got like, kind of this wisdom and holistic, what's the right thing to do, and to be really kind of just simplistic about it, Commander Data is an artificial life form, and occasionally you can see Commander Data like the typing is faster than fast, and the thought processes are faster than fast, and in computational aspects, Commander Data excels. Judgment, wisdom, slow, Captain Picard excels, but the two are in this synergistic partnership. And he used that as a metaphor, Dede did, to speak about we really need to think carefully about what's the human dimension and what's the machine dimension, and not confuse the two.
mm, yeah,
And I think about that in terms of this uh, quote from Dr. Mithu Storoni about the quality aspects of thinking and the quantity aspects of thinking, and which ones are being done by AI.
oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I've interacted quite a bit with Chris on this, and um, I am a little concerned about really, can you not have them coalesce? In our paper, Gardner Campbell wrote a closing piece about the art of inquiry. The art of inquiry, and he's expressing grave concerns about our losing the art of inquiry. And the thing that you alluded to is thinking about thinking. You know, this is something that is so bound up with our conversations about quality. I keep thinking about these things. Um, and there was a patent clerk, a lowly old patent clerk in um, 1905 who wondered, what if I could read a beam of light? And it turned out to be Albert Einstein, and this led to the special relativity, where he basically said light is a constant. The speed of light is a constant. So what is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is dilation of time. Whether you're going fast or slow or near me or far away from me, light speed is constant. Therefore, what has to change? Time. Time dilates. At least our perception of time
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
dilates. And I'm wondering if somehow that does apply to quality. If quality is a constant,
mm-hmm,
if
mm-hmm,
I'm sure as hell no Einstein, but
mm-hmm.
if it is quite constant, what dilates? What has to change in order to keep quality constant? And I'm worried
Um,
about that now. What if it isn't constant? What if it is constant? What if we do a fifth? I mean, this is it. I mean, I'm looking at this kind of stuff, and I'm back to Calvin. Look, you know, Persic was turned down 121 times. J.K. Rowling was turned down 12 times, you know. Um, uh, uh, Stephen King was turned down 30 times before it got published. I think they're all quality, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a rough patch associated with
Mm-hmm.
this. God.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Couple thoughts rattling around in my head in response to that. You and I've talked before, maybe not on recording. There's a sense in which, the construct of the Platonic ideal comes to mind, right? And the whatever shadows on the cave wall.
Yeah, the
I'm
allegory of the cave.
sometimes that's right.
Allegory of the cave.
I sometimes I've used this slide in presentations sometimes about quality in the online and digital learning space. I got this open licensed image of shadows of human figures being cast on the ground, and against that as a background, I have placed this statement: standards point the way to, but are not themselves quality. Standards point the way to, but are not themselves quality. We have things that we refer to as quality standards, right? Standards point the way to, but they are not themselves quality. And then the illusion was, kind of the allegory of the cave, Platonic ideal. And I wonder about that in relation to your verbalized hypothesis about, is quality a constant in the Platonic ideal sense? Maybe it is.
That's fascinating. I just was privileged to attend the Rollins College commencement, where we had one of our Rosen Scholars, our fifth Rosen Scholar, graduating from uh, Rollins College. And Grant Cornwell, the departing president, gave a stunning, stunning address. And in the address, he pleaded for valuing the value of a liberal education in terms of being able to think about this. And he basically said, to this next generation, we yield. It is your turn to take over from us. And he pointed out the fact, and that we've all known this, that you are now, an alumnus of Rollins College, and it is your alma mater. Alma mater being Latin for nourishing mother. This is an interesting thing because I have been, in our conversation, I've been reviewing Neil Postman's work on the end of education, and him lamenting back in the 60s that we have lost a compelling narrative for quality education. And we have sort of gone toward the Raymond Callahan notion of the cult of efficiency with education. And I believe in many respects, we're seeing that in terms of, let's have an education that leads to gainful employment, an efficient education. Somehow to me that relates to quality, but I don't know exactly what I'm thinking about yet. But that notion of a compelling narrative quality environment about the value of education. We've got a lot going on here, Kelvin, and I think we're raising more questions than we're answering, but it's really a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, I think of two things in relationship to that, and I always enjoy talking to you, Chuck, because you throw out references like they're going out of style, and I have to go look them up, and then I learn stuff. So that's good. And I have been trying to capture some of the references and throwing them in the description for each of these recordings on YouTube, just in case, we want to go back and find them, look them up, or refer to them, or anybody who happens to be watching this might do the same. Somebody, I'm sure this idea sources back to someone else, but somebody in my life kind of expressed to me years ago this concept. I don't think I have a pithy, easily replicable, elegant expression of the idea, so I'm going to be kind of clumsy with it. But when there are contrasting endpoints, like these two constructs that are sort of like diametrically opposed, but they're both important. You know, you're on to something. Like you have to kind of like be reaching out to touch the one endpoint and reaching out to touch the other endpoint, and you're on to something that I have sometimes thought of as transcendent or eternal, or to use your construct, you know, constant, like the speed of light, or possibly quality, or maybe a Platonic ideal. You're into something that's bigger than just the way that you can, you know, like what's the thing with light, right? It's a particle versus wave, but it's both somehow, or you know, it's that kind of an idea. And I wonder about that in the midst of the your comments about education. And then I think about, I've been enamored for years, as I think you know, by this elegant turn of phrase from Dr. Dale Whitaker. You know, he talks about much of what we aspire to in higher education is about two things: lifting lives and lifting livelihoods. And I've pondered that a lot. I think that sometimes there are camps, and there's the lifting lives people, and there's the lifting livelihoods people. And the reality is, we need to do both. Both
Well,
are important. If you're not doing both, then you probably aren't doing the holistic ideal thing.
yeah, we're back to, we're back to the binary. We're always viewing it as a binary kind of thing. And, um, God, as I look at these things, if I say one more time, I'm gonna quit. But um uh Shannon, Claude Shannon, when he developed information theory, he was the one that developed the notion of a bit,
Mm.
and information in his perspective reduces uncertainty. Whether it's meaningful or not is irrelevant to Shannon's information theory and revolution. His work allows everything that we're doing, talking over this thing, cell phones, everything, viewing information theory in that context, the bit, the computer, everything. And when Einstein won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, he won for saying and discovering that light travels in these packets called photons. And it wasn't until Schroeder came along and talked about what you just said, that these particles exist as simultaneously as both waves and particles. And they don't become either one, they're just probabilities until you peek and measure it. And that stuff is way beyond anything that makes sense to me intuitively. I don't know how you feel about that. Yeah, that's great. But in a sense, readers, what the hell are these people talking about? You know? Because today
Well, I
with my
mean,
bottle of water and your cup of coffee, it didn't make a damn bit of difference.
but you know, for me, I think, you know, like you said, binary, and that's a helpful construct here. This idea of like these oppositional, seemingly oppositional binaries, that both things can be true. And when both things are, when you're dealing with things that are held in tension, when you deal with valuable truism statements, constructs that have to be held in tension, I think you're on to something. I think you're on to something that transcends, you know, it's the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts, right? And whether we're talking about the broad goals, aspirational goals of education, whether we're talking about quality, the speed of light, whatever, right? You and I mean, we won't have time to unpack this a lot, but you and I were talking via text message recently about, because I've been reading yet again about it with a group of folks here. Uh, the
Well-being.
Gallup organization has been making money writing books about a construct that I think is aspirational and pragmatic, which is the construct of well-being, well-being individually, well-being in the workplace. They've synthesized a lot of research, and so they have this holistic construct of well-being. It's complex, right? But then they have these operational approaches to dealing with it There's this, I feel like it has to have like the Circle C copyright thing next to it. Gallup Net Thriving as a, GNT as a metric. They have this ladder construct that goes back to the 60s. This researcher, Hadley Cantrill, this ladder construct of imagine your best possible life and your worst possible life, and where are you now on the ladder and what's the number? That's an interesting thing, right? And then these 5 dimensions of well-being: career well-being, social well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being, and something else. You got those things, but I feel like it's the whole and the sum of the parts thing again, right? Like if you start breaking things down, you want to operationalize, but it's like grains of sand. The quality holistically has eluded you. You can talk about the quality thing, but then you can't you can't get anywhere, right? Because it's just theoretical, and it's not practical. And maybe somebody tuned into this and thought, I thought I was going to get some help in figuring out how to have a better online course. Well, I mean, maybe, probably not pragmatically from this conversation. But...
Well, let me quote Nassim Taleb. He's got a quote in his book, I think, Anti-Fragile. You can study 100 ants for the rest of your life, for the rest of your life, and you will never understand an ant colony. You can't do it because an ant colony is transcendent. It is more than the sum of its individual parts. That is the emergence property you've just described in complex systems. That is exactly it. And I mean, there's a great Bull Durham, Annie Diller has what was it, Annie, in Bull Durham. She's got a great line, take 100 ants and they can't do dick. Take 400 million and they'll build a cathedral. That's what you're talking about, in a sense. I think, Coleman, I don't know. I've traveled a lot, and when you go to Florence and you look at David, the statue of David, whoa! You don't need a metric. You don't need anything because you are blown away. Or you go to Barcelona, and you go and you look at Guernica, by Picasso. Whoa. I mean, this is the kind of thing. There's a thing you just talked about. Sooner or later, this issue of quality rises above those constructs. Not to say that they're not important and necessary. In my world, as a statistician, they're necessary but not sufficient to define quality. So, is it context dependent? Is it dependent on online education or digital education? Is it dependent on parenting? I don't know. I keep saying I don't know because I don't know. But this conversation is getting better and better and better because we're and now we got 5 minutes left in our meeting.
Well, maybe that is a good place to start looking for, the exit for this conversation. That's a good thing. It's getting better and better and better. we're I don't know if we're any closer to finding like a practical finish line, to the quality conversation, but it's getting better and better and better.
Yeah. Well, there may be 4 or 5 or 8 things, that are maybe middleware, that aren't the transcendent, but aren't the metrics that help us sort of crystallize our thinking about what is quality. I don't go around I don't know if you do or our listeners do, if there are any listeners. I don't go around looking at everything saying quality, not quality. I just sort of muddle through life, and every once in a while, quality just jumps up and slaps me across the face. It's like you and I when we had great teachers, right? Oh, we just said, whoa, this guy or girl is really good. And like the other day when you said you were an adequate music teacher, I don't believe that at all. believe you were
Yeah, it
great.
wasn't that good.
You were
It
great.
wasn't that good.
But you had quality moments, didn't you?
Oh man, I can only hope. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I tried, and maybe, I think about what is that Special Olympics slogan or mantra, or what uh is it, it ends with being brave in the attempt, and I think the first part
Right.
has to something to do with, with trying, or with all your heart, or something, and maybe that's all that we can do. And I ran across, was reminded this week somewhere, I was listening to something, this Blaise Pascal quote about the heart having its reasons, which reason knows nothing of.
About it.
And how much have we reduced our humanity to rationality? And some things, I think they exceed our capacity for rationality.
Right.
And, then what?
Yeah. Yeah. Then what? Then what? Well, I guess we're at a point to be continued, hopefully.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
but
Hopefully.
but but uh, we somehow had our moments. Like again, I go back to when we began teaching, both of us. I don't know about you, Calvin, but I walked into that classroom on the first day. I didn't have a clue. I don't know how you felt. Not a clue.
No, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And it was survival.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's whenever I've taught graduate students who are in or coming out of the K-12 classroom, in case nobody had told them, I started telling them, you understand year one is just about survival.
Yeah.
Just get to the end.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good point here, Chuck. Let's get to the end of this conversation, and we'll keep moving toward the end of the eventual. It's like it's maybe it's like you approach the speed of light, but you never get to it. Maybe that's it. I don't know. We're never done considering quality, but we do hope to
Yeah.
get to a more, as you said, middleware, practical pausing point over time that maybe is helpful in guiding practice in higher education, and particularly digital education. We can only hope.
We can only hope. And perhaps in these subsequent conversations, we can begin to search the world for what we believe to be examples of quality. Um, uh, I think if we get it all productive, we ought to be able to do something like that. But I don't know if we're able to do it in a binary fashion. This is quality, this is not. Maybe some aspects of it are again. But Calvin, you have motivated me. I really enjoy this. I really do. All I can say is go Cardinals.
Charge on.
Charge on. Charge on
Bye.
Knights.
Bye for
Bye bye.
now.
Thank you all, everyone. Bye bye.